Hi Founder fans, Jason here. Welcome to Founder of the Day, a live read-along of this time Federalist number 15. I'm going to brighten myself up a little bit. Thank you for coming. Let's talk about the Federalist Papers. Now, this is kind of a long one, and not only that, it's the first of 6 on the same subject. 3 by Alexander Hamilton, 3 by James Madison. Let's pop over to the big board here. We are starting off with none other than Alexander Hamilton. He'll be the first 3. And then we'll get 3 more from James Madison. And these are on the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve the Union. And the next 5 will be the same subject continued. The insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve the Union. So, I hope you're ready for it. We're going to talk some trash about the Articles of Confederation. So, let's get right to it. Again, told you the title, Independent Journal, coming back to this one. December 1st, 1787, this one, again, by Alexander Hamilton. Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for coming. To the people of the state of New York. Let's read some 18th century language. In the course of the preceding papers, I have endeavored, my fellow citizens, to place before you in a clear and convincing light the importance of union to your political safety and happiness. So, what he's saying here is, so far, we've just tried to show you why the Constitution is going to be great. I have unfolded to you a complication of dangers to which you would be exposed, should you permit that sacred knot which binds the people of America together be severed or dissolved by ambition or by avarice, by jealousy or by misrepresentation. So, again, Hamilton's saying, I've told you what's going to go wrong if we don't listen to this Constitution. In the sequel of the inquiry through which I propose to accompany you, the truths intended to be inculcated will receive further confirmation from facts and arguments hitherto unnoticed. As you can tell, it is difficult to read this 18th century language. The sequel of inquiry through which I have proposed to accompany you, the truths intended to be inculcated will receive further confirmation from facts in... Okay, so he's saying this paper will further prove what I've been telling you, basically. Okay, where does this sentence end? If the road over which you will still have to pass should in some places appear to you tedious or irksome, you will recollect that you are in quest of information on a subject the most momentous which can engage the attention of a free people. That the field through which you have to travel is in itself spacious, and that the difficulties of the journey have been unnecessarily increased by the mazes with which sophistry has best beset the way. So, it might still seem like a lot of trouble to figure out whether or not you believe the Constitution is the right way to go. But that is mostly because the decision has been made harder for you than it has to be. It will be my aim to remove the obstacles from your progress as in compendious a manner as it can be done, without sacrificing utility to dispatch. So, I know it seems like it's been made way harder than it should be. I'm going to make it super easy by using words like compendious, apparently. Again, this is more common language back then. In pursuance of the plan which I have laid down for the discussion of the subject, the point next in order to be examined is the, quote, insufficiency of the present Confederation to the preservation of the Union, end quote. I like how he quotes the title of the paper he's writing. So that's what's coming next. He's basically telling you the title of the paper, which you read at the beginning. That's how titles work, Hamilton. It may perhaps be asked what need there is of reasoning or proof to illustrate a position which is not either controverted or doubted, to which the understandings and feelings of all classes of men assent, and which in substance is admitted by the opponents as well as by the friends of the new Constitution. So you might be thinking, Why is Hamilton telling me what's wrong with the Articles of Confederation? Everyone agrees on it, even the anti-federalists, which is true. Pretty much everyone said there were some issues that needed to be rectified, at least. It must in truth be acknowledged that, however these may differ in other respects, they in general appear to harmonize in this sentiment, at least, that there are material imperfections in our national system, and that something is necessary to be done to rescue us from impending anarchy. So, yes, most anti-federalists also agreed something had to be done. The facts that support this opinion are no longer objects of speculation. So, okay, I'm not speculating here. These are facts. They have forced themselves upon the sensibility of the people at large, and have at length extorted from those whose mistaken policy has had the principal share in precipitating the extremity at which we arrive, a reluctant confession of the reality of those defects in the scheme of our federal government, which have been long pointed out and regretted by intelligent friends of the Union. Again, saying everyone seems to agree that there are problems with the Articles of Confederation. It's interesting that he references the Articles as our federal government, which it most assuredly was not. And although kind of it was a federation, it was a confederation, many of the anti-federalists consider themselves federalist because they like the Articles of Confederation. So he's kind of tying the words together here. Tying the two documents, making them seem like they're trying to accomplish the same goals, even though they, as I said, most assuredly were not. We may indeed with propriety be said to have reached almost the last stage of national humiliation. Not a lot to translate there. We are pretty much at the place where the international community is laughing at us. We should be humiliated by us as the United States as a whole. There is scarcely anything that can wound the There is scarcely... It's the modern words I have trouble with. There is scarcely anything that can wound the pride or degrade the character of an independent nation which we do not experience. So anything that can embarrass a nation, we are currently being embarrassed by. Are there engagements to the performance of which we are held by every tie respectable among men? So, is there anything we do right? These are the subjects of constant and unblushing violation. So, okay. Still, we're embarrassed. Do we owe debts to foreigners and to our own citizens contracted in a time of imminent peril for the preservation of our political existence? So, do we owe not only France and Spain and the Netherlands money from the Revolutionary War, but individual private American citizens? Yeah, we owe them money. We're in debt. These remain without any proper or satisfactory provision for their discharge. So we owe this debt, and we have really no way to get rid of it. Have we valuable territories and important posts in the possession of a foreign power, which, by express stipulations, ought long since to have been surrendered? So, what he's referencing here is after the Revolutionary War ended, there was the Treaty of Paris, and it said that there were certain forts on the borders in the Northwest Territory, northern New York, parts of Maine, that were supposed to be handed over to the United States, and they kind of just simply weren't, and really wouldn't be until after the War of 1812. These are still retained to the prejudice of our interests, not less that of our rights. So, no, Britain still holds on to these posts. Are we in a condition to resent or to repel the aggression? So, can we get rid of them? Can we push them out of these forts that are rightfully ours? We have neither the troops, nor the treasury, nor the government. And that footnote says, by which I mean the Union. So when he says we, he means the Union, the United States. We have neither the troops, nor the treasury, nor the government. Oh, wrong button there. Whoopsie daisy. Whoopsie daisy. Okay. Are we even in a condition to remonstrate with dignity? So, can we even hold our heads up high when we're being embarrassed of this nature? The just imputations on our own faith in respect to the same treaty ought first to be removed. So, you know, because of the treaty we've agreed to, we should take care of these problems. Are we entitled by nature and compact to a free participation in the navigation of the Mississippi? So we're supposed to go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi. Can we trade on it? Spain excludes us from it. So no, Spain's not letting us sail on the Mississippi. Is public credit an indispensable resource in time of public danger? So is our ability to take out loans from other nations if we go to war important? We seem to have abandoned its cause as desperate and irretrievable. So yeah, but we don't seem to care because we can't. Is commerce of importance to national wealth? Is making money important to national wealth? Ours is at the lowest point of declension. So I think that's an 18th century word for decline. So our commerce is at the lowest point of decline. Is respectability, Hamilton loves asking himself questions. Is respectability in the eyes of a foreign powers a safeguard against foreign encroachment? Excuse me. Is respectability in the eyes of foreign powers a safeguard against foreign encroachment? So if other nations have respect for us, does that lessen the chance that they might attack us? The imbecility of our government even forbids them to treat with us. So yeah, they should be able to talk to us, but we can't even make treaties with the government we have. Our ambassadors abroad are the mere pageants of mimic sovereignty. So right now he's talking about Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, respectively, over in Europe trying to make negotiations. He's saying that they are, unfortunately, just figurehead. I don't know what the right word is. They're there, but they can't do anything. They're lame duck ambassadors, I guess you could say. Is a violent and unnatural decrease in the value of land a symptom of national distress? Let's see. So, is the decrease in the value of our land, does that prove that we're not doing very well? Let's see. The price of improved land in most parts of the country is much lower than can be accounted for by the quantity of the waste. I'm sorry. YouTube's telling me not getting smooth streaming. Hopefully it sounds good. The price of improved land in most parts of the country is much lower than can be accounted for by the quantity of waste land at market, and can only be fully explained by that want of private and public confidence, which are so alarmingly prevalent among all ranks, and which have a direct tendency to depreciate property of every kind. So, improved land means land that the trees have been cut down and is being used. The cost of it is lower than can be accounted for because there's so much unimproved land on the market. And can only be explained, he's saying, by the want of public and private confidence. The people don't believe in the market enough to make it work appropriately, and which have a direct tendency to depreciate the market of every kind. So if people don't believe in the market and property, the name of the market's eluding me, the housing market, although this is particularly land, if that is low, then it's going to bring down the value of all kinds of property and everything you can buy. Is private credit the friend and patron of industry? So does private credit, does individual loans help boost the economy? That most useful kind, which relates to borrowing and lending, is reduced within the narrowest limits. And this still more from an opinion of insecurity than from the scarcity of money. So, again, lending and borrowing helps to boost the economy. Money's going around, interest is being gained. But if that is reduced to its narrowest limit, so if that's not working, it makes the market. It's not because there's not enough money to go around that's a problem. It's because there's not enough faith in the institutions that's a problem. See. To shorten an enumeration of particulars which can afford neither pleasure nor instruction, it may in general be demanded what indication is there of national disorder, poverty, and insignificance that could befall a community so peculiarly blessed with natural advantages as we are, which does not form a part of the dark catalogue of our public misfortune? Sorry, there's a question mark at the end there. To shoot the enumeration of particulars which can afford neither pleasure nor instruction. So, to make a long story short, essentially, it may in general be demanded what inclination of a national disorder, poverty, and insignificance could befall a community so particularly blessed. Okay, so he literally says long story short, to shorten an enumeration of particulars which can afford neither pleasure nor instruction. Translation, long story short, it can be what else indicates the problems in the United States when we have so much going right for us, but our public misfortune, our debt, our credit, our international respect is waning. Okay. This is the melancholy situation to which we have been brought by those very maxims and counsels which would now deter us from adopting the proposed Constitution, and which, not content with having conducted us to the brink of a precipice, seem resolved to plunge us into the abyss that await us below. So this is where we find ourselves. We have everyone saying that we should not have the Constitution. Without the Constitution, we just have to be content that we are going to jump off a cliff as a nation and everything is going to be destroyed. Here, my countrymen, impelled by every motive that ought to influence an enlightened people, let us make a firm stand for our safety, our tranquility, our dignity, our reputation. So, if we want to do what's right, we're an enlightened people. If we want to be smart and do what's smart, we need this Constitution. Let us at last break the fatal charm which has too long seduced us from the paths of felicity and prosperity. So, let us get rid of these mistaken ideas that are ruining us. It is true, as has been before observed, that facts, too stubborn to be resisted, have produced a species of general assent to the abstract proposition that there exist material defects in our national system. But the usefulness of the concession on the part of the old adversaries of federal measures is destroyed by a strenuous opposition to a remedy upon the only principles that can give it a chance of success. So, real quick, right at the top there, it has been before observed that facts too stubborn to be resisted. John Adams famously said, facts are stubborn things, and he's often given credit for that. But you see Hamilton saying basically the same thing here. So it was a fairly common phrase at the time. Now, what he goes on to say is, he's talking trash about the Anti-Federalists, saying, everyone, as we discussed earlier, agree that there is a problem with our national system. Now, again, the Articles of Confederation were far from a national system, intentionally not a national system. He is calling it a national system because he wants one, and saying that there is one with defects, when the truth is there kind of really wasn't one, but that's what he's going with. But the usefulness of this concession, so even though everyone admits that this is the problem here, there are still people opposing the remedy, aka the Constitution, which is the only thing that could fix the problem. Now, many Anti-Federalists argue there are other ways we can go about fixing the problems, but Hamilton's saying this is the only way to fix the problem. While they admit that the government of the United States is destitute of energy, they contend against conferring upon it those powers which are requisite to supply it with energy. There's a word he uses twice there, energy. As I've mentioned before, energy is a phrase that Hamilton uses all the time, and George Washington used frequently when trying to quietly, through friends, talk about and promote through back channels the Constitution. Washington never goes out and says we need the Constitution publicly. It would have been too much for him to say that. But he does, Hamilton's out there saying it for him. And what he's saying here is the United States, under the Articles of Confederation, doesn't have the energy it needs. and we want it to have energy. Again, some of my more conservative viewers might not love the idea of a very energetic government that does a lot of stuff, but that is really why they created the United States Constitution, as Hamilton is very explicitly stating here, has said in papers in the past, and will say in more papers we read in the future. Again, he wants the Constitution is the only thing that can fix the problems of the Articles of Confederation, which he here is contending really comes down to its lack of energy, its lack of ability to get things done. They seem still, and they, again, are anti-federalists, they seem still to aim at things repugnant and irreconcilable, at an augmentation of federal authority without a diminution of state authority, at sovereignty in the Union, and complete independence in the members. I went a little far. So, the anti-federalists still are talking about things that are despicable, that won't help, and don't want to increase the power of federal authority. They don't want to increase the power of federal authority because they don't want to reduce the power of state authority. But you need, according to Hamilton, at sovereignty in the Union and complete independence of the members. So he's throwing out that last part there, saying these anti-federalists want no union at all. Again, not what the anti-federalists were calling for. They did want some union, and they wanted to improve the Articles of Confederation almost to a man. But this was not how they cared for it. They still, in fine, seem to cherish with blind devotion the political monster of an imperium in imperio. I don't speak Latin. I'm not entirely sure what imperium in imperio is. I feel like imperio has something to do with empire, but they still find cherish the blind devotion the political monster of this. Sorry, I don't know all that. Again, we're going through a lot of papers here. I can't know everything, people. Can't know everything. If you do, leave it in the comments. This renders a full display of the principal defects of the Confederation necessary in order to show that the evils we experience do not proceed from minute or partial imperfections, but from fundamental errors in the structure of the building, which cannot be amended otherwise than by alteration in the first principles and main pillars of the fabric. So here he's finally getting to it. That the reason we are going through the problems with the Articles of Confederation here, and not only here, again, this is the first of 6 papers that Hamilton and Madison will write, very specifically criticizing the Articles of Confederation. He's saying the reason we need to go through this is that it's not just little problems that need to be corrected, as the Anti-Federalists want, as, you know, they were sent to the Philadelphia Convention to fix, to remedy the Articles of Confederation. What Hamilton's saying here is it's not little errors to be fixed. It is main design flaws in the core of how it was created. To be fair, John Dickinson, who created it, did go to the Constitutional Convention and sign that document. So we'll give him that even the author of the Articles of Confederation thought there were some significant changes that need to be made. Okay, and here it comes with the bold lettering. The great and radical vice in the construction of the existing Confederation is in the principle of legislation for states or governments in their corporate or collective capacities, and as contradistinguished from individuals of which they consist. Whoa, now that is a big statement there. That's a lot to unpack. So the great and radical vice in the so the main core problem under the Articles of Confederation is that the laws are made by the states in their corporate or collective capacities. So he's calling the state governments corporate or collective, and they contradistinguish from the individuals of which they consist. Contradistinguish is a tough word. The opposite of distinguish. They make it undistinguished from the individuals in which they consist. So again, just to wrap up that one, it's an important sentence, and it's a very confusing one. So the main problem with the Confederation is that the states make the laws, the people leading the states make the laws, and they contradistinguish from the individuals. So they are not separated enough from the individuals. Seems to be what he's saying there. It's a very confusing sentence. Though this principle does not run through all the powers delegated to the Union, yet it pervades and governs those on which the efficacy of the rest depend. So the main problem here, as he's discussing, is that the laws and rules are made by the individual states with the people therein, but it does not, the Union as a whole cannot, under the Articles of Confederation, actually have those laws, as he says, pervade throughout. So there's essentially inconsistencies in how the laws are run throughout the United States. Oh, right. It's basically federal supremacy doesn't exist. So if there's a conflict of laws in two states, the federal government can't overrule. Right. Okay. So that's what I was concluding to. Thank you very much, Robert, for contributing there. Yeah, that was essentially what I was trying to get out. So Robert says it really well. If there are two states that have conflicting laws, then the federal government under the Articles of Confederation, which was not very federal, and that's the problem, according to Hamilton. It's not federal, and there's nothing the federal government can do to unite them. Let's see. Except as to the rule of appointment, the United States has an indefinite discretion to make requisitions for men and money, but they have no authority to raise either by regulations extending to the individual citizens of America. So the federal government can do things. They can make appointments of ambassadors. They can ask the states for soldiers and for money, but they can't demand it. And because of that, they can't extend it to the individual citizens. So they can't demand it of the states, nor can they demand tax money of the individuals. The consequence of this is that though in theory their resolutions concerning those objects are laws, constitutionally binding on the members of the Union, yet in practice they are mere recommendations which states observe or disregard at their option. So because of this situation we've created for ourselves, the Articles of Confederation, the Continental Congress, he says constitutionally bind. He says they will make laws about what the states have to give, and if the states don't give it, oh well, there's nothing they can do. That's kind of true. The Articles of Confederation specifically say that the United States is a, quote, league of friendship, where, the quote, the states retain their sovereignty, end quote. So there wasn't actually constitutionally binding, but as a peace treaty, if all 13 the representatives of all 13 states at the Continental Congress, all of them agreed on something, then theoretically they were all supposed to join in, or if they didn't send the men or money that was being requested by Congress, they were essentially breaking their treaty and could be kicked out, I guess. It wasn't, people didn't send money all the time. That is a major problem. That is why they were this is the problem they were trying to correct when they sent people to first the Annapolis Convention, then what became the Constitutional Convention. Okay. Is this a long run-on sentence? Looks like it. Great. It is a singular instance of the capriciousness of the human mind that after all the admonitions we have had from experience on this head, there should still be found men who object to the new Constitution for deviating from a principle which has been found the bane of the old, and which is in itself evidently incompatible with the idea of government. A principle, in short, which, if it is to be executed at all, must substitute the violent and sanguine agency of the sword to the mild influence of the magistracy. So, it's the capriciousness of the human mind. It's just crazy to me that after all the things we see, after everyone agreeing that the Articles of Confederation has major problems, there are still people who don't like this Constitution because which is deviating from the principle, the bane of the old, which is compatible the idea of self-government. A principle in which, in short, I'm not sure what principle he's exactly referencing here. It seems to be the. I'm curious if he gets to it in the next paragraph. What he's alluding to, because he's saying, I can't believe that there are still people who don't like the Constitution because it's not it seems to be a little bit different than the idea of republicanism that we have grown accustomed to. And this is a fun sentence. Must substitute the violent sanguinarity of the sword to the mild influence of the magistrate. Okay. There is nothing absurd or impracticable in the idea of a league or alliance between independent nations for certain defined purposes precisely stated in a treaty regulating all the details of time, place, circumstance, and quantity, leaving nothing to future discretion, and depending for its execution on the good faith of the parties. So he's saying if the Articles of Confederation were really just a treaty, there would be very specific things in there that we can do, and there's no future discretion. There's no decisions to be made. Hey, in the future, we'll decide how much money to raise. We'll decide what we're trading later. No, in a real treaty, everything is outlined very specifically. It's interesting because some vagueness is one of the main anti-federalist arguments against the Constitution. Compacts of this kind exist among all civilized nations, subject to the usual vicissitudes of peace and war, of observance and non-observance, as the interests or passions of the contracting powers dictate. So, excuse me one second. A lot of talking. Compacts of this kind among all. So, these types of peace treaties or treaties of commerce, they are very specific. Among all, is subject the usual to interest of passion, contradicting powers dictate. So they're very specific, essentially. In the early part of the present century, there was an epidemical rage in Europe for this species of compacts, from which the politicians of the times fondly hoped for benefits which were never realized. So, in the early 1700s, Europe kept making treaties like this, and they really hoped that there'd be a bunch of great things happening, and great things never happened. Real long one, okay. With a view to establishing the equilibrium of power and the peace of that part of the world, all the resources of negotiation were exhausted, and triple and quadruple alliances were formed. But they were scarcely formed before they were broken, giving an instructive but afflicting lesson to mankind, how little dependence is to be placed on treaties which have no other sanction than the obligations of good faith, and which oppose general considerations of peace and justice to the impulse of any immediate interest or passion. So, they kept making these treaties in Europe. And what happened? There was nothing tying them. There was nothing demanding that they actually follow through, and therefore they fell apart. And this is a warning Hamilton's giving that the Articles of Confederation, as they're created, look like they might fall victim to the same thing. Let's see. Is this another... real run-on sentence. Okay, we'll probably have to come back and break this one down. If the particular states in this country are disposed to stand in a similar relation to each other, and to drop the project of a general discretionary superintendence, the scheme would indeed be pernicious, and would entail upon us all the mischiefs which have been enumerated under the first head, but it would have the merit of being, at least, consistent and practicable, abandoning all views towards a confederate government. This would bring us to a simple alliance, offensive and defensive, and would place us in a situation to be alternate friends and enemies of each other, as our mutual jealousies and rivalships, nourished by the intrigues of foreign nations, should prescribe to us. So, go back a little bit. Under the Articles of Confederation, if they're not going, he says discretionary superintendents right there. If we're not going to unite with one firm leader in charge, one firm nation, then eventually, this Article of Confederation, since no one's giving the money, the soldiers or money that the Continental Congress needs, eventually it's not going to be able to act as any kind of confederated government. And it'll turn into just a simple treaty of peace. And that eventually will be broken because, as he's discussed and John Jay discussed in earlier papers, mutual jealousies are going to break out, and there will be little wars that break out. I like how we use the word rivalships instead of rivalries. I don't think that's a real word anymore, but he goes for it. Okay. But if we are unwilling to be placed in this perilous situation, if we still adhere to the design of a national government, or, which is the same thing, of a superintending power under the direction of a common council, we must resolve to incorporate into our plan those ingredients which may be considered as forming the characteristic difference between a league and a government. We must extend the authority of the union to the persons of the citizens, the only proper objects of government. So, if we don't want to stay in this very dangerous situation of the Articles of Confederation, but if we do want to adhere to a national government, he says still to the design of a national government. Again, it's not what the Articles were, which he seemingly omits later in this long sentence, or which is the same thing, a superintending power. So it's interesting, he's calling the national government a superintending power. Maybe we should start referring to the federal government as the superintending government. That would be fun. That'll be our little thing here at Founder of the Day. Under the direction of a common council, we must resolve to incorporate into our plan those ingredients which may form the characteristic difference between a league and a government. So he acknowledges that it's a league here. We need, no matter what we do, we need to move from a league to a government. The Constitution is the best one, but even if this isn't the particular Constitution you want, we need to give more power to what was then, we call it now the Continental the Continental Association. The Congress of the Confederation found it. So we call it the Congress of the Confederation after the Articles were ratified, but the people at the time still called it the Continental Congress when they went there. So, fun fact. Okay. Government implies the power of making laws. Okay, not much to leave there. That's all governments do. Well, one of the things governments do. It is essential to the idea of a law that it be attended with a sanction, or, in other words, a penalty of punishment for disobedience. So this is the law, and if you don't obey the law, you get fined or imprisoned. Okay, pretty standard. If there be no penalty annexed to disobedience, the resolutions or commands which are pretend to be laws will, in fact, amount to nothing more than advice or recommendation. So if the Continental Congress says we need money or soldiers, but they can't actually go out and demand it and punish anyone for disobeying, then they're just like advisors. They're not really powerful. Okay. This penalty, whatever it might be, can only be inflicted in two ways: by the agency of the courts and ministers of justice, or by military force, by the coercion of the magistracy, or the coercion of arms. So he's acknowledging that no matter what, it is going to be coercion. Robert over here, basically stressing the unity to avoid being spheres of influence to Spain, France, or Britain. Yeah, that's true. And did you notice earlier he called it triple or quadruple alliance, and triple alliance becomes popular? Important phrase 150 years later. Less, actually. But back to this. You either can enforce laws by coercion of the majesty or coercion of arms. This is sounds a lot like what some of the anti-federalists write, where they say, Hamilton calls it coercion either way, which is a tough way to look at it. But the anti-federalists generally say along the lines of, you either have people that voluntarily obey laws that are just because that's the community they want to live in, or you have people that need to be forced to obey the laws because the people don't agree with the laws and don't want to obey them. And what many of the anti-federalists say is, hey, we want to create a government where the people want to obey the laws because they're good laws. Don't kill anyone. Great. Sounds good. I will obey that law. You know, I want to make something up totally random. You know, don't eat cheese on Fridays. That's a stupid law. I will break that law. And if that's your law and it's stupid and people break it, you're going to have to force them to obey it. And that's coercion. I'm surprised he uses coercion of the magistracy. That's a strange way to put it. The first kind can evidently apply only to men. The last kind must of necessity be employed against bodies politic or communities or states. So, if the magistrate, aka the politicians, the government, the representatives we elect make a law that we like, then people can obey it. But if we need to do something by force of arms, then that has to be applied against bodies. So like bodies politic. So groups of people, communities, like whole towns or states. He's literally saying we will need to do it. Again, we will need to force laws on entire states. It's really tough language for him trying to convince people to make their state a part of this government. It is evident that there is no process of a court by which the observance of the law can, in the last resort, be enforced. Okay, whoops, too long. So a court just can't get everyone. Excuse me. Okay. Sorry, got an Amber Alert. Very weird. It got really windy today, so I thought it might be a tornado warning. Come on, it's winter. No more lightning storms. Anyway. Sorry for that. It is evident that there is no process of a court by which observance of the law can in the last resort be enforced. So a court can't really have entire cities and towns and states obey a law. It can have individuals obey a law, but not entire places. Sentences may be denounced against them for violations of their duty, but these sentences can only be carried into execution by the sword. So the government can say, you've committed a crime, go to prison, please, but you need to have someone come force you into prison. Most people don't, I guess not most people, but a large chunk of crime committers don't just go to prison. I've seen movies. An association where the general authority is confined to the collective bodies of the communities that compose it. That's a weird comma. In an association where the general authority is confined to the collective bodies of the communities that compose it, every breach of the law must involve a state of war, and military execution must become the only instrument of civil obedience. So, the general authority. So when there is a local government that disobeys a state or larger federal law, you need to go to war and force them to obey that law. Such a state of things can certainly not deserve the name of government, nor would any prudent man choose to commit his happiness to it. Okay, so at least he's saying in this scenario, where the army is forcing entire communities to obey laws, you could barely call that a government because they're not listening to it. It's a civil war. And no one would want to live in that scenario because it will not be conducive to your happiness. I told you this was a long one, guys. We're getting through it. We will make it. There was a time when we were told that breaches by the states of the regulations of the federal authority were not to be expected, that a sense of common interest would preside over the conduct of respective members, and would beget a full compliance with all the constitutional requisitions of the Union. So, what he's saying here is, they used to say that Americans were Americans, and we would just obey the rules. We would just agree to do what the Continental Congress said. And that certainly hasn't come to fruition. People aren't just going to, because they're Americans, do it. Which, side note, I literally, just before I did this, set up tomorrow's Cato number 5 Anti-Federalist paper, where Hamilton and the Federalists, about this time, were arguing that Americans won't have tyranny. They would never let the president become a tyrant. And literally, a good portion of Cato number 5 is arguing, yeah, you can't just expect people to do that. So, exactly what Hamilton's saying, some of the Anti-Federalists used to argue against him when it comes to the presidency, as opposed to the problems with the Articles of Confederation. Very interesting. Again, I will remind you that both these and the Anti-Federalist papers were propaganda that were being used to try and sway the opinions of the public in one direction or another. So they will use the same arguments in different places and then ignore them in others. Okay. This language at the present day would appear as wild as a great part of what we now hear from the same quarter will be thought. when we shall have received further lessons from that best oracle of wisdom, experience. So once we're a little more, based on our experience, we can reflect and make decisions that are appropriate right now. It at all times betrayed an ignorance of the true springs by which human conduct is actuated, and belied the original inducements to the establishment of civil power. So at all times betrayed the ignorance and true spirit. So he's talking, it being the language being used at the time, seems ignorant of the true spirit. So is pretending to not understand how humans actually work, and ignoring why we have government in the first place. Why has government been instituted at all? So kind of like what I was saying. Because the passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint. That is a really pessimistic attitude, Mr. Hamilton. The passions of men will not conform to the dictates of reason and justice without constraint. People don't act reasonable. And unless we have laws in place that they understand they will be punished for if they disobey them, they're just not going to do reasonable things. This is Hamilton's something any pro-anarchist, if you want to say, here's Hamilton's argument against anarchy. Sorry, Henry David Thoreau, this is what Hamilton has to say. Has it been, not that Henry David Thoreau was technically an anarchist, don't come at me like that. Has it been found that bodies of men act with more rectitude or greater disinterestedness than individuals? So have communities and governments acted more altruistically or disinterestedly than individual people? The contrary of this has been inferred by all accurate observers of the conduct of mankind, and the inference is found upon obvious reasons. So what he's saying is, no, governments are just as interested, if not more, than individuals. Regard to the reputation has less active influence when the infamy of a bad action is to be divided up among a number when it is to fall singly upon one person. So a government, if the government of 5 people does something terrible, they get to point at the other 5 people. As opposed to one person, when they do something bad, there's no one to point at. I mean, criminals find a way. A spirit of faction, which is apt to mingle its position in the deliberations of all bodies of men, will often hurry the persons of whom they are composed into improprieties and excesses for which they would blush in a private capacity. So factions, again, political parties, as James Madison very famously talked about in number 10 already. Political parties, which will happen no matter what in any kind of body of men, any government, any community, assembly, will have people who are in it, as he says, hurry themselves along to improprieties and excess, to do more, to try and get more for themselves than they would if it was just them by themselves. So you might be embarrassed to ask for $100, but if you and 5 people are trying to organize $20,000, you might be pretty quick to say, I could use 5,000 of those dollars, when you'd be hard pressed to just ask for 100 by yourself. Most of us. In addition to all this, there is in the nature of sovereign power an impatience of control that disposes those who are invested with the exercise of it to look with an evil eye upon all external attempts to restrain or direct its operations. So there is a natural sovereign power, an impatience of control that disposes those who invest with the exercise of it. All external. Okay, so generally speaking, people who are entrusted as representatives of a government, they are always nervous about people not in the government who are trying to take power from the government. It is their job, after all, to keep the power in the government. From this spirit it happens that in every political association which is formed upon the principle of uniting in a common interest a number of lesser sovereignties, there will be found a kind of eccentric tendency in the subordinate and inferior orbs, by the operation of which there will be perpetual effort in each to fly off from the common center. So, when there are a bunch of states united in a league, for example, the individual states are going to do their best to keep their own power, and they'll be jealous and worried about the other states trying to take some of the power they have. This tendency is not difficult to account for, so yeah, it's pretty obvious. It has its origin in the love of power. Power controlled or abridged is almost always the rival and enemy of that power by which it is controlled or abridged. So, as I was saying before, people are going to be jealous of the power they have and not want the other states to take it. This simple proposition will teach us how little reason there is to expect that the persons entrusted with the administration of the affairs of the particular members of a confederacy will at times be ready, with perfect good humor, and in unbiased regard to the public weal, to execute the resolutions or degrees of the general authority. Simple proposition will teach how there's little reason to expect that people entrusted with the administration of affairs. So there's no reason to think that the people in the Continental Congress are going to be acting unbiasedly at the benefit of the whole. They are going to be looking out for their particular states. The reverse of this results from the constitution of human nature. The reverse of this results from the constitution of human nature. So, interesting statement. Human nature would... There's a little reason to expect that there are persons entrusted with human... Sometimes we're ready with... So, okay. So, human nature, the reverse of this. So, the reverse... He's being sarcastic with the previous sentence, that they're just going to do it in good humor. No, the reverse of this is true. The individuals will look out for their states in the same way the states would look out for themselves. If, therefore, the measures of the Confederacy cannot be executed without the intervention of the particular administrations, there will be little prospect for them being executed at all. So if the Continental Congress needs the state governments to step in and say, okay, we'll obey you, then they're just never, the rules made by the Continental Congress are just never going to be obeyed. The rulers of the respective members, whether they have a constitutional right to do it or not, will undertake to judge the propriety of the measures themselves. So, so the states, the people leading the individual states, are going to determine whether or not they want to obey the Continental Congress. They will consider the conformity of the thing proposed or required to their immediate interest or aims, the momentary conveniences or inconveniences that would attend its adoption. So the states won't be forward thinking about the decisions made by the Continental Congress. They're going to decide, does this help us right now, or is this a pain in the butt right now? Usually it will be a pain in the butt. All this will be done, and in a spirit of interested and suspicious scrutiny, without that knowledge of national circumstances and reasons of state, which is essential to a right judgment, and with a strong predilection in favor of local objects, which can hardly fail to mislead the decision. So, states are going to be looking at it from their own position. They're not going to be looking at it as what's best for all the states. They're just going to look what's best for us. They don't have the greater viewpoint that you would need in this scenario. The same process must be repeated in every member of which the body is constituted, and the execution of the plans framed by the councils of the whole will always fluctuate on the discretion of the ill-informed and prejudiced opinion of every part. So it's not just one state is going to be looking out for itself. All the states are going to be looking out for themselves, and they're all going to be hindering the Continental Congress at the same time in different ways. Those who have been conversant in the proceedings of popular assemblies, who have seen how difficult it often is, where there is no exterior pressure of circumstances to bring them to harmonious resolutions on important points, will readily conceive how impossible it must be to induce a number of such assemblies deliberating at a distance from each other at different times and under different impressions, long to cooperate in the same views and pursuits. Basically, if we're not all fighting a war against Britain together, then it's going to be very difficult for us to unite on any decisions. Certainly decisions the states would actually enforce. In our case, the concurrence of 13 distinct sovereign wills is requisite, under the Confederation, to the complete execution of every important measure that proceeds from the Union. So we need every single state to be on the same page in every single instance for things to work. It has happened as was to have been foreseen. So, should have seen this coming. The measures of the Union have not been executed. The delinquencies of the states have step by step matured themselves into an extreme which has at length arrested all the wheels of the national government and brought them to an awful stand. So, looking at what's happening, this is exactly what's happened. The states are not agreeing, and the Continental Congress is at a standstill. I'm Hamilton. I've been there. Trust me, it's terrible. We'll never pay these debts. Congress at this time scarcely possesses the means of keeping up the forms of administration, till the states can have time to agree upon a more substantial substitute for the present shadow of a federal government. So the Continental Congress can barely keep itself together long enough for us to ratify this Constitution, to which many of the Anti-Federalists would say, well, why didn't you come up with solutions that we wanted you to? Why did you create a whole new government? That's not what, you're the one creating these problems, Hamilton. Not exactly how they would say it, but they would think it. Things did not come to this desperate extremity at once. So Rome wasn't built in a day. This didn't happen overnight. The causes which have been specified produced at first only unequal and disproportionate degrees of compliance with the requisitions of the Union. So, causes specified produced only unequal. So, slow and steady, this happened. You know, sometimes it would be a big jump. This would happen here. Something goes wrong over there. And then we started realizing this is not working out the way we had hoped. The greater deficiencies of some states furnished the pretext of example and the temptation of interest to the complying or the least delinquent states. So some states are more of a problem than others. They make it hard. I like it. They make it hard for the complying or the least delinquent states. So he says, like, the states that are doing what they should or are being at least getting around to it eventually, they're having a harder time because of the states that won't participate at all. Why should we do more in proportion than those who are embarked with us in the same political voyage? Okay, so, you know, why would New York do what it's supposed to when Virginia is not doing it, for example? Every state didn't do it sometimes, so that's not one particular example. Why should we consent to bear more than our proper share of the common burden? Why should we do more than everyone else? Just because we're wealthy New York? These were suggestions which human selfishness could not withstand, and which even speculative men who look forward to remote consequences could not, without hesitation, combat. So, no one can argue why we should do it and someone else shouldn't when we're all supposed to. Each state, yielding to the persuasive voice of an immediate interest or convenience, has successfully withdrawn its support till the frail and tottering edifice seems ready to fall upon our heads and to crush us beneath it. Publius. So each state, slow and steady, has dropped out of their responsibilities, and now the Continental Congress is unable to do what it's supposed to, and we have these debts we're supposed to pay to other nations and private citizens of the United States, and if we don't figure out a way to pay those off, it's gonna collapse and destroy everything. So that was Federalist numero 15, one of the longest ones, so thank you for bearing with it with me. I'm going to bring this back up so I'm not so dark. There we go. One of the longest Federalists. It was a lot to go on. Essentially, to recap, Hamilton is criticizing the Articles of Confederation, and along the way, not just calling out its problems, but along the way discussing why things need to be rectified and how the Constitution essentially can be rectifying them. He doesn't outright say this is what the Constitution does, here's the solution, but he does allude to it quite frequently. A lot of interesting things. If there's anything in particular that stuck out to you, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to learn what you learned. That's why we're doing this, so we can all learn together. Thank you for watching. I'm going to call it quits for this particular video. It has been well, pretty much exactly an hour. I kept it to an hour despite it being, again, one of the longest Federalist papers. Luckily, a lot of it's short little question and answer things that Hamilton likes to do. Very much luckily, he didn't list out a bunch of questions as he likes to do. He likes to ask a series of questions in a row and then go off. This time he's question, answer, question, answer. So anyway, Wesley, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you coming. Tomorrow is trivia, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We'll do our weekly wrap-up to prepare for trivia. 8:30 is trivia. So hopefully I see you there. I am going to get going right now, and I don't have a good sign-off for these. So this is your Federalist reading friend, Jay Manders. Thank you, Wesley, and we will be back with tomorrow morning coming out with Cato number 5, as I mentioned earlier, and then tomorrow night's trivia, so we will definitely see you there. Wrong button. Where is it? Got it.